Hey, what's up guys? It's your host, What's His Face. And after watching the video the other day about this guy who quit his job installing 5G base stations due to the fact that he thought that it was harmful to people, I took a tumble down the deep, dark rabbit hole of 3G, 4G, and 5G, asking the question, are radio frequency waves dangerous? The answer? Maybe. We're going to take a look at that in today's video. This is Inspiring Inquiry. Okay, so in this video, we're going to take a look at each claim and whether or not there's any truth to it. Let's take a look.
Radio frequency has been proven by the National Institute of Health's toxicology program to be carcinogenic. And that's just at 2G, 3G. They found conclusively that it caused tumors and cancer. All right. They tested it on rats, but they proved it. $30 million 2-year study, they proved it. Cell phone radiation is carcinogenic.
Well, they did in fact do a study. Let's go see what that study says and other organizations that have also done studies. All right, so we can go ahead and look and see what this study has to say about that. All right, so they conducted a 2-year toxicology study in rats and mice to help clarify the potential hazards. And this is going to be for 2G and 3G cell phone radiation that's emitted. These are the frequencies that it goes through. Okay? What they found was clear evidence of tumors in the hearts of male rats, some evidence of tumors in the brains of male rats, and some evidence of the tumors in the adrenal glands of male rats. And if you look, it says right here, it was unclear if tumors observed in the studies were associated with exposure to RFR, which is radio frequency radiation, in female rats and male and female mice. So that means in all these studies, they did it on male rats, male mice, and female mice. And it says in 3 of the 4, it was unclear if tumors observed in the studies were associated with the exposure to radio frequency radiation. The only evidence that they did have was clear evidence of in the hearts of male rats, and then some evidence in the brain and adrenal glands of male rats. We have clear evidence is the highest, some evidence, equivocal evidence, and no evidence, which is the lowest. So as we see up here, we have clear evidence, which is the highest in the hearts of male rats. The others, we have some evidence. And that's only in 1 out of the 4 different organisms that they tested it on. As a follow-up, they published an article in October 2019 that evaluated DNA damage. So what did they find? Well, scientists found that radio frequency radiation exposure was associated with an increase in DNA damage. Specifically, they found radio frequency exposure was linked with significant increases in DNA damage in the frontal cortex, in the brain of male mice, in the blood cells of female mice, and the hippocampus of male rats. So they're finding it in 1, but not all. Remember, conclusively they proved. That's what he said. There are many factors that influence whether damaged DNA will lead to tumors. So just because it damages the DNA doesn't in fact mean that it's going to lead to tumors. National Toxicology Program plans to conduct additional studies to learn more about how radiofrequency radiation might cause DNA damage. Okay, so here's an important thing that we also need to take a look at. 5G is the emergent technology that will eventually overtake the existing 2G, 3G, and 4G technology. Now it says overtake, but there's going to be 3 different levels that the 5G operates on. They're called bands. You have low band, mid band, and high band. These the 3G and 4G technology uses those lower bands. They're going to be operating on some of the same frequency levels. In the meantime, people will continue to be exposed to radio frequency radiation in the 700 to 2700 megahertz range. As the 5G network is implemented, some of the signals used by the 5G network will use the same lower frequencies used as older technology, like I was just saying, previously studied by National Toxicology Program, but the 5G network will also use higher frequencies, thereby exposing wireless users to a much broader spectrum of frequencies. The higher frequencies, known as millimeter waves, can rapidly transmit enormous amounts of energy or data. Millimeter waves do not travel as far and do not penetrate the body as deeply as the wavelengths from the lower frequencies. Millimeter waves are likely to penetrate no deeper than the skin, whereas the low frequencies have been shown to penetrate at least 3 to 4 inches into the human body. Now remember, this guy is making this video to warn us how much more dangerous 5G is over 3G or 4G or any of the other earlier generations of radio frequency radiation. Remember that. National Toxicology Program is currently evaluating the existing literature on the higher frequencies intended for use in the 5G network and is working to better understand the biological basis for the cancer findings reported in earlier studies on radio frequency radiation with 2G and 3G technologies. Additionally, work is ongoing to develop smaller radio frequency radiation exposure chambers for additional short-term studies that will take weeks and months to complete rather than the years. Remember, this study that we're referencing here took 2 years to make. So they're saying that this could take weeks and months. The exposure system is also being designed to have a compatibility to conduct studies with various radiation frequencies and modulations to keep up with changing technologies in the telecommunication industry. So basically what that means is that they're going to have the capability to study various types of frequencies. So frequency is a spectrum. So you have the lower frequency with the longer wavelengths, and then you have higher frequency with the shorter wavelengths. Okay, so you go from everything from AM radio waves all the way up to gamma rays. We're talking Hulk here. Okay. Okay, now that we were able to shine a little light on the study that he was using to say how dangerous it was, let's go ahead and take a look at some other studies that study 5G and then even other studies that study radio frequency radiation and its effects. Let's see what they have to say. Okay, so now that we took a look at the National Toxicology Program study, let's look at the National Institute of Health, National Cancer Institute, cell phones and cancer risk. Why is there a concern for cell phones may cause cancer or other health problems? There are 3 main reasons. Cell phones emit radio frequency radiation. We all know that, a form of non-ionizing radiation. The number of cell phone users has increased rapidly. There were over 400 million cell phone subscribers, including the guy who made that video on a cell phone. Keep that in mind. In the United States in 2017, over time, the number of cell phone calls per day, the length of each call, and the amount of time people use on cell phones have increased. What is radio frequency radiation and how does it affect the human body? The energy of electromagnetic radiation is determined by its frequency. So it's ionizing radiation is the high frequency, or non-ionizing radiation is the low frequency. Let's see, the frequency of radio frequency electromagnetic radiation ranges from 30 kilohertz all the way to 300 gigahertz. And that's the millimeter wave radiation. All right, exposure to ionizing radiation such as X-rays are known to increase the risk of cancer. However, although many studies have examined the potential health risks of non-ionizing radiation from radar, microwave ovens, cell phones, and other sources, there is currently no consistent evidence that non-ionizing radiation increases cancer risk in humans. The only consistently recognized biological effect of radio frequency radiation in humans is heating. The ability of microwave ovens to heat food is one example of this effect of radio frequency radiation. Radio frequency exposure from cell phone use does not cause heating to the area of the body where the cell phone or other device is held, the ear or the head. However, it is not sufficient to measurably increase body temperature. There are no other clearly established effects on the human body from radio frequency radiation. These studies have not shown clear evidence of relationship between cell phone use and cancer. However, researchers have reported some statistically significant associations for certain subgroups of people. All right. Now these are talking about the types of studies. I'm not gonna go over that. Now it's gonna reference the study that we looked at earlier. The National Toxicology Program studied radio frequency radiation, 2G and 3G frequencies in rats and mice. This large project was conducted on highly specialized labs that specified and controlled sources of radiation and measured their effects. The rodents experienced whole body exposures of 3, 6, or 9 watts per kilogram of body weight for 5 to 7 days per week for 18 hours per day in cycles of 10 minutes on and 10 minutes off. A research overview of the rodent studies with links to peer review summary is available on the National Toxicology Program website. The primary outcomes observed were a small number of cancers of Schwann cells in the heart and non-cancerous changes, hyperplasia in the same tissues for male rats but not female rats, nor in mice overall. These experimental findings raise new questions as to the potential for radiofrequency radiation to result in cellular changes and offer potential avenues for further laboratory studies. Cancers in the heart are extremely rare in humans, where the primary outcomes for potential concern with respect to radiofrequency radiation exposure from cell phones are tumors in the brain and central nervous system. Schwann cells in the heart in rodents are similar to the kind of cells in humans that give rise to acoustic neuromas known as vestibular schwannomas, which some studies have suggested are increased in people who reported the heaviest use of cell phones. The National Toxicology Program has stated that they will continue to study this exposure in animal models to further advance our understanding of biological underpinnings of the effects reported above. Another animal study in which rats were exposed 7 days per week for 19 hours per day to radiofrequency radiation was reported by investigators at the Italian Ramazzini Institute. Among the rats with the highest exposure levels, the researchers noted an increase in heart schwannomas in male rats and non-malignant Schwann cell growth in the heart of male and female rats. However, key details necessary for interpretation of the results were missing: exposure methods, other standard operating procedures, and nutritional feeding aspects. The gaps in the report from the study raise questions that have not been resolved. What are the findings from different studies of cell phone use and the cancer risk inconsistent? Recall bias. That's when you go to ask somebody a question, how often did you use your phone? What side did you use it on? They're going to remember generally, like, oh, I mostly use it on this side, but they're not going to recall every single time that they use it from this side and then switch to this side. They're also not going to recall how often they use their phone. Oh, well, I usually use it for a few hours a day. Well, some days it can be more, some days it can be less. So using these types of ways of studying it aren't very reliable because people's memories aren't perfect. Inaccurate reporting, which can happen when people say something that has happened more or less often, like I was just talking about. Morbidity and mortality. Among study participants who have brain cancer, gliomas are particularly difficult to study. For example, because their high death rate and short survival periods of people who develop these tumors, patients who survive initial treatment are often impaired, which may affect their response to questions. Let's see, participation bias, which can happen when people who are diagnosed with brain tumors are more likely than healthy people known as controls to enroll in a research study. So that means when they perform these studies, people that already have problems are more than likely to enroll in these studies rather than healthy people. Let's see. Also, controls who did not or rarely use cell phones were less likely to participate in the Interphone study that controls who use cell phones regularly. So that means that it's really hard to get people in that don't use a cell phone because everybody uses cell phones. Changing technology and methods of use. So the more that our technology changes, the different methods that are applied. This is why we have a discrepancy in the different studies being performed. A broad range of health effects have been reported with cell phone use. Neurologic effects are more particular concern in young persons since the brain is primarily exposed organ. However, studies of memory, learning, and cognitive function have generally produced inconsistent results. The most consistent health risk associated with cell phone use is distracted driving and vehicle accidents. Now we're going to take a look at what have expert organizations said about cancer risk from cell phone use. Let's see what they had to say. Well, in 2011, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the working group classified cell phone use as possibly carcinogenic to humans based on limited evidence from human studies, limited evidence from studies in radiofrequency radiation in cancer in rodents, and inconsistent evidence from mechanistic studies. The working group indicated that although the human studies were susceptible to bias, these findings could not be dismissed as reflecting bias alone, and that casual interpretation could not be excluded. The working group noted that Any interpretation of the evidence should also consider that the observed associations could reflect chance, bias, or confounding rather than an underlying causal effect. In addition, the working group stated that the investigation of risk of cancer of the brain associated with cell phone use poses complex methodological challenges in the conduct of the research and in the analysis and interpretation of findings. Basically what it's saying is that we can't just dismiss everything based on the fact that, there is going to be recall bias, there is going to be these discrepancies, that it does need to be looked further into. But we don't have any of that consistent, conclusive evidence that he was referring to earlier. We just don't have that. In 2011, the American Cancer Society stated that IARC classifications mean that there could be some cancer risk associated with radiofrequency radiation, but the evidence is not strong enough to be considered causal and needs to be investigated further. Individuals who are concerned about radiofrequency radiation can limit their exposure, including using an earpiece and limiting cell phone use, particularly among children. In 2018, the ACS, the American Cancer Society, issued a statement on the draft of the National Toxicology Reports, noting that these findings were still inconclusive and that so far a higher cancer risk in people has not been seen, but that people who are concerned should wear an earpiece when using cell phones. The National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences states that the weight of the current scientific evidence has not conclusively linked cell phone use with any adverse health problems, but more research is needed. The Food and Drug Administration notes that studies reporting biological changes associated with radiofrequency radiation have failed to be replicated, and that the majority of human epidemiological studies have failed to show a relationship between exposure to radiofrequency radiation from the cell phones and health problems. The FDA, which originally nominated this exposure for review by the National Toxicology Program in 1999, issued a statement on the draft National Toxicology Program reports released in February 2018, saying, based on this current information, we believe the current safety limits for cell phones are acceptable for protecting the public health. FDA and the Federal Communications Commission share responsibility for regulating cell phone technologies. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention states that no specific evidence definitively answers whether cell phone use causes cancer. The Federal Communications Commission concludes that currently no scientific evidence establishes a definite link between wireless device use and cancer or other illnesses. In 2015, the European Commission's Scientific Committee on Emerging and Newly Identified Health Risks concluded that overall, the epidemiologic studies on cell phone radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation exposure do not show an increased risk of brain tumors or of other cancers of the head and neck region. The committee also stated that epidemiologic studies do not indicate increased risk for other malignant diseases, including childhood cancer. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at the study from the National Toxicology Program, the one that they did in rats and mice, we have a better idea of what's going on with that. Then we also went over and we looked at cancer.gov and seen what do they have to say about the number of studies that they've taken a look at. And basically, the consensus is we need more studies. We need more, better, pointed studies to understand what's going on. That means that any claims that RFR causes cancer in humans or rats are tenuous at best. We need to be able to do more studies so we can have a better idea of what's actually going on. So for people that are going around out there trying to warn you, telling you how dangerous this is, just take into consideration there's a number of things that we do every single day that have the same risk or even greater risk, like going outside and sunbathing in the sun, smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol. Any one of these things, even drinking soda, damages your DNA. All of these things are things that could lead to cancer. We know that we take a certain amount of risk every day in the different things that we do. We can't make any claims to how dangerous something is until we have the evidence to prove it. So I want you and him and anybody else who questions this to go and do your own research. Don't just take my word for it. Go down in the description below. You will find the links that you can go and read every one of those studies by yourself. And I encourage you to do so.